in modifying susceptibility to disease. This may well apply in reducing the risks of cancer. It may well apply in reducing some of the risks of cardiovascular disease.
Tony and Herbert are both salesmen, so they both spend a lot of time away from the office. But Tony here has a British Telecom radio pager, so he can be contacted immediately. That'll be his office now. All he has to do is pick up the phone. As for Herbert, well, his office may find a way to get in touch with him too. Eventually. With a British Telecom radio pager, you're never out of touch.
When the house is quiet, not even the phone. The kids are at school, but you're not alone. There's work to be done, it's much more fun with two. So good to be friends, and he's company for you.
All dogs love marrowbone, so give your best friend Pal Dog Food. The marrowbone he loves, plus all the meaty goodness he really needs.
So give him Pal, 'cause he's your best friend.
This is Thames from London. In 30 minutes, our local bulletin. First, the national news at the studios of ITN. It's 10 o'clock.
"60 dead in Lebanon as Arafat fights for his life. Unemployment down last month by 73,000. A Soviet nuclear sub is in trouble in the Atlantic. Fidel Castro watches his Cuban wounded come home. The bone marrow boy who may die because there's no money." Good evening. The PLO leader, Yasser Arafat, and his followers are tonight fighting for their lives in their last base near Tripoli in northern Lebanon. King Hussein of Jordan has appealed to Arab leaders to join in a rescue operation. Mr. Arafat and his men are under attack by Palestinian rebels backed by Syria. At least 60 people have been killed and more than 200 seriously injured as artillery and tank fire pounded the PLO positions, hitting an oil refinery and 2 refugee camps nearby. Rescue workers have been unable to get through to the 40,000 civilians in those camps. Tonight the rebels say they control the heights overlooking the camps and claim that many of Arafat's supporters are deserting to their side. There were earlier reports of an attempt to assassinate Mr. Arafat, but he's said to be broadcasting hourly messages to his troops on shortwave radio. David Smith reports on how Mr. Arafat has been preparing for what may be his last stand.
A year ago, as the PLO left Beirut amid gunfire and celebrations, Yasser Arafat was its undisputed leader, claiming moral victory out of military defeat. Yet today, Yasser Arafat is trapped in northern Lebanon, surrounded by rebels who deserted from his army and cut off from his supporters in the world outside because the Syrians control his way in and out of here. And the Syrians stand firmly behind those within the PLO who are now at war with Arafat.
What do you say to people who say that you are finished?
Silly.
You say it's silly?
Silly rumors from the Western mass media, some of the Western mass media. They are not imagining that we are here according to the will and the determination of our Palestinian people.
Has what has happened in the past few months to you, has it been rather humiliating, given everything a year ago, the position you were in?
I was in a siege 1 year ago. I am in another siege in this year. What is the difference? In 1976 we were in siege. In 1970 in Amman I was in a siege. It is not a picnic. It is a revolution.
Whether Arafat survives or not will ultimately depend on just how many hearts and minds he can retain among the Palestinian people at large. Here at his headquarters, we found his men training children of 6 and 7 for the army, making sure they stay on Arafat's side of the Palestinian divide. But their future and that of the tens of thousands like them scattered across the Arab world is more bleak than ever, because no longer does the Palestinian cause speak with the one authoritative voice that was Arafat's, and no longer is anyone in the position, as Arafat was a year ago, to negotiate on behalf of all of them for that Palestinian homeland. David Smith, News at 10, Tripoli, northern Lebanon.
Lebanon's other warring factions, trying to sort out their differences in talks in Geneva, have asked President Gemayel to launch a new diplomatic initiative to remove all Israeli and foreign forces from their country. And they'll meet again tomorrow to consider consolidating the ceasefire that ended 3 weeks of civil war. One delegate said, "There's no winning side in this issue. If we continue like this, Lebanon will be the only winner."
Lebanon's President Amin Gemayel opened this morning's conference as first reports were coming in of the attack on Yasser Arafat's PLO positions in Tripoli. He appealed to all sides to stop fighting while reconciliation talks here were still going on. But his supporters could not conceal their irritation that the talks were bogged down over Lebanon's troop withdrawal agreement with Israel, while it was Syrian forces who were participating in the attacks on Arafat.
Look what's happening in Tripoli today. They're shelling Tripoli. Tripoli is not a Christian city, it's a Muslim city. They're shelling it today, and they're shelling it heavily. There's a lot of people being killed. They're now attacking 2 Palestinian camps.
Things are not looking very optimistic, are they?
Well, the moment we reach a little agreement here, the moment you see it's heated up back home. That's the Syrian tactic.
But the pro-Syrian faction, led by Druze leader Walid Jumblat, had clearly seized the initiative here. They maintain the Syrian presence in Lebanon could not be compared with Israel's.
Lebanon is an Arab country that belongs to the Arab community and has, traditionally speaking, historical known relations with Syria. When Lebanon will be freed from the Israeli presence, then we will ask Syria to go out.
The reconciliation conference continues here tomorrow, but as happens so often in Lebanon's history, attempts at peace are being overshadowed by deeds of violence. Norman Rees, News at 10 in Geneva.
The Americans are tracking a Russian nuclear-powered submarine which they think is in trouble in the Atlantic. They discovered it almost 500 miles off Charleston in South Carolina, which is a major American submarine base.
The submarine was spotted in international waters by U.S. Navy patrol planes. The Defense Department here says the sub appears to be in serious trouble, unable to dive and barely able to maintain headway. It's a Victor III nuclear attack submarine. The first Victor III was only built 4 years ago, and 8 have so far been launched. It has 8 nuclear missile launching tubes and can drop nuclear depth charges on other submarines. Spokesmen at the Defense Department here can hardly contain their delight at the find, particularly as the submarine is so recent. Its presence is not unusual, though its disability is. Russian submarines are known to patrol in that part of the Atlantic regularly. If the Russians aboard the craft do ask for help, the Americans will go to their assistance. John Snow, News at 10, Washington.
The Danish Parliament has ordered its minority government to work actively against the deployment of medium-range nuclear missiles in Europe. MPs voted by more than 8-1 against NATO plans to site cruise and Pershing missiles in the West. But the government survived the vote by agreeing only to pass on the Danish Parliament's views to its NATO partners.
Here at home, unemployment is down by more than 73,000 to just over 3 million, and the trend shown by the seasonally adjusted figures is also down. That's for the second time in 3 months. The TUC described the drop as a superficial improvement, but said the total reflected continuing depression.
Although the government is being ultra-cautious about the long-term significance of these figures, there's no doubt they're among the best since Mrs. Thatcher won the 1979 election. And there's a feeling among the Whitehall experts that they could just mark the turning point. There's plenty of circumstantial evidence. Overtime working is up, short-time working is down, redundancy figures are down, and job vacancies are at their best for 2.5 years. But the most telling statistic comes if you look at the seasonally adjusted trend. In the 6 months from last October, the average monthly rise in adult unemployment was 28,000. In the latest 6 months, that's come down to 9,000, and the signs are that's shrinking fast too. So although our rate of unemployment is still a sixth above the rest of Europe, there are encouraging signs. There could be a big hiccup in January when unemployment normally rises sharply, but otherwise the signs are that there'll be a number of further falls in the months ahead. Well, the new Employment Secretary, Mr. Tom King, said the figures were distinctly encouraging and said the way to get more jobs was through lower inflation, and that meant lower pay settlements.
I'm very pleased to see the improvements that there have been this month. And, I mean, 70,000 fall in the overall total is obviously an encouraging development. Now, what we want to see, obviously, is a lower level. We can't have it by just wishing for it. We're going to have to work for it. We've worked for it so far by getting inflation down, by getting industry more competitive, Britain's starting really to earn its living in the world. And that's the encouraging area where I think we can get more jobs.
The jury in the trial of Dennis Nilsen at the Old Bailey have been sent to a secret hotel for the night after they failed to reach their verdicts today. Nilsen has pleaded not guilty to 6 charges of murder and 2 of attempted murder on the grounds of diminished responsibility. The judge, Mr. Justice Croom Johnson, told the jury they had heard unforgettable tales of horror during the trial, but he warned them that that should not necessarily lead to the conclusion that Nilsen was mad.
The jury retired at 11:30 this morning. Later they asked for lunch to be brought to their private room, and after they'd been together for 4.5 hours, the judge called them back into court. He asked the foreman of the jury, "If you're given extra time tonight, is there any likelihood that you will reach a verdict?" The foreman replied, "No, my lord," and arrangements were made for the 8 men and 4 women to stay in a hotel overnight. In his summing up, Mr. Justice Croom Johnson told the jury they must decide whether Nilsen had an abnormality of mind which caused diminished responsibility when he killed, or was he simply an evil and cruel man who killed because he liked to do so. He reminded the jury that no psychiatrist has said Nilsen was insane. All say, with different emphasis, that there is and was an abnormality of mind. But the prosecution psychiatrist stops there, saying there is no mental disorder or personality defect, so therefore he says there is no substantial impairment. Recalling the 2 defence psychiatrists, the judge recalled their claim that there was impairment of responsibility. He said, because there are 2 defence psychiatrists and only 1 for the prosecution, it doesn't mean defence wins. It's not like scoring goals. Nilsen has been on remand in Brixton Prison. He left the Old Bailey under heavy security tonight and will return to court tomorrow.
The Labour leader, Mr. Kinnochio, has launched what he called the Labour Party's campaign to save the National Health Service. He said Labour's warnings during the election that a Conservative government would do further serious damage had been tragically and quickly vindicated. In the Commons, Mrs. Thatcher defended her government's policy.
There are now 640,000 more inpatient and day cases, 2 million more outpatient and emergency cases being treated, 18% more geriatric inpatients, 14% more geriatric outpatients, 1 million more courses of dental treatment, 620,000 more sight tests, 400,000 more people, many elderly visited at home. That is a splendid improvement over the record of any previous government.
The Labour campaign was taken out onto the streets from party headquarters with Mr. Kinnochio in a special ambulance. It will tour Britain distributing information and staging exhibitions. The Health Minister, Mr. Kenneth Clarke, today announced that the South London Hospital for Women will close next year despite a fierce campaign for its survival. It's the last general hospital in Britain which is run by women for women.
The defiant message outside the hospital took on a special irony tonight. The local women, MPs and nursing staff who'd been campaigning to keep the South London open had lost their fight. The hospital will close next April so that its running costs of £5 million a year can go towards the expansion of St George's Hospital in Tooting. The campaigners, though, say it provides a unique service. A high proportion of its patients are black or Asian, and many refuse to be treated by male doctors on religious grounds. News of the closure brought an angry reaction.
I think it's absolutely disgusting. There's not another finer hospital in London compared with this.
I don't want male doctors, really. You know, I've been examined by male doctors. You feel embarrassed. You're so relaxed. You're so calm here. And they're so gentle, where a man doctor isn't gentle.
I think people comes first, not finance.
I am horrified and aghast, and I think it's an appalling decision by the government.
and one which they will regret.
But despite all the protests, Wandsworth Health Authority says the hospital is a luxury compared to other local priorities like facilities for the elderly and for the mentally ill. These, they say, are best served by the expansion of St George's Hospital. Sally Jones, News at 10 in South London.
The government's announced this week that it's providing an extra £650,000 over the next 18 months for bone marrow transplants. But the 6 London hospitals that perform the operations say that's not enough. Westminster Hospital in London told Mrs Shirley Twigger that they didn't have the facilities to treat her 6-year-old son, Adrian.
Adrian was born with a genetic disorder which is slowly killing him. The only treatment which might have saved him was a bone marrow transplant. But only a handful of hospitals can perform such an operation. He was referred to one in London, which already had 43 children on its waiting list. It takes the hospital almost a year to get through that number of operations. Their bone marrow clinic said there could be no treatment for Adrian.
Well, it was absolutely devastating, really, because that was the only treatment that I knew was available, and without it, Adrian had no chance at all.
And exactly what do you face now, then?
Really, just to watch him die in front of us. It's as simple as that. He's just going to get worse and worse, and it's very hard to see a child that you love die virtually in front of your eyes.
Britain performs more operations of this type than anywhere in the world, but for every case they accept, they have to turn away 6 more. Doctors say Adrian now cannot be saved. He'll go blind, become crippled, and die within 6 years. The extra government money will pay for 60 more transplants, but 700 people need them every year.
No death is ever acceptable, although most doctors in medicine have always, as they will always, sometimes have to make difficult judgments about which patients to give priority to. What we do is we identify the patient needs and we direct the money to it. And I think one mustn't be misled by over-dramatic campaigning, by over-enthusiastic consultants, who I think give a misleading impression that people are dying through neglect.
London's Royal Free Hospital contains one of the most modern clinics in Europe for bone marrow transplants. But 9 years after it was built, this ward has still to treat a single patient. Less than £200,000 would open its doors. David Chater, News at 10 in London.
In Grenada, the American withdrawal is gathering speed. We'll have a special report on that in part 2. Also, the black civil rights leader who wants to run for president. And 7 Spurs fans are still seriously ill after last night's violence in Holland. That's in a couple of minutes.
Never seen Trafalgar Square so quiet on New Year's Eve.
Boring, really. No revellers to move on, no dancing in a fountain, no fun at all.
I blame that new Hitachi video disc. Pictures from records. Amazing. You can even have stereo and RCA do all the discs.
Ah, but what's on them?
Oh, lots of superb Hollywood films, great music, even Jane Fonda's workout. And to think, it's only about £199.
How much?
Aye? The Hitachi CED video disc players. 3 models from £199.95. How much? Announcing the arrival of the new Rowenta Compact Wet and Dry Cleaner. It's a household cleaner that cleans anything, from ordinary carpets to clinging pet hairs. It works really powerfully and efficiently. It can clean kitchen tiles and DIY mess. There's not a lot it won't do. In fact, it's so versatile, it can even unblock sinks and drains. The Compact Wet and Dry Cleaner from Rowenta. It leaves the rest behind.
What do you look for in your service station? Easy access for petrol and fast in and out? Emergency replacements or protection for your engine? A handy shop for refreshments or things you've forgotten late at night? Just follow the cat's eyes and you'll clearly see Esso quality and very good value.
de bursa.
Sir Paul Scoon, the Governor-General of Grenada, said tonight he would announce an interim government within a week and would hold elections open to all Grenadians within a year. In the Common Foreign Affairs debate, Sir Geoffrey Howe, the Foreign Secretary, said Sir Paul had welcomed Britain's offer to send a high-level team of advisers to Grenada and that Britain would respond positively to requests for help. Our political correspondent, David Walter, asked Sir Geoffrey if Britain would be sending police and troops there.
I would think it's relatively unlikely that we shall be involved in sending significant numbers. We're much more likely, I suspect, to be involved in offering advice and guidance and leadership of some kind. Perhaps, I don't know. He may take the view, and it's entirely for the Grenadian government to decide, that they can have all their needs met, or most of them, in another way. What we're trying to do is to make sure that all our partners in the Commonwealth are ready in a positive fashion to do their bit when the time comes, if we're asked to do so.
The American ambassador to the United Nations, Mrs. Jean Kirkpatrick, has said Mrs. Thatcher misunderstood the whole basis of the US action in Grenada. During a satellite interview linked to Europe, she said America hadn't invaded because of the island's communist government, but to rescue Americans. She suggested there were as many Americans in Grenada as there were British citizens on the Falklands. President Reagan tonight confirmed he's pulling his troops out of Grenada. He said America's objectives had been achieved. He called the American dead and wounded heroes of freedom, and he clashed angrily with the reporter who questioned the operation.
Mr. President, some people say that the U.S. has now lost the moral high ground, that there's no difference between what we did in Grenada and what the Soviets did in Afghanistan. What's your response to that?
Oh, for heaven's sakes, anyone who would link Afghanistan to this operation, and incidentally, I know your frequent use of the word invasion, this was a rescue mission. But in Afghanistan, if you will recall, when the Soviets installed their choice of head of state for Afghanistan, and in the process in changing the forces there, an American ambassador was murdered in Afghanistan.
American forces on Grenada began winding down their presence this afternoon. More than 2,000 soldiers are being flown back to the United States, but at least 2,000 others will remain until at least the interim government has been formed. While they were leaving, it was stalemate at the Cuban embassy, where the ambassador who's been ordered out refuses to go until all Cubans have been evacuated. The last remnants of the Marxist dream for Grenada, more than 600 captured Cubans, are waiting to go home. In the ghetto area, where the air is filled with the pungent smell of marijuana, Grenadians who largely supported the old Bishop regime are cautious about what comes next. They claim the People's Revolution gave them hope. The question everyone here is asking is who will occupy the Prime Minister's residence.
There will be no prohibition of any party. One of the tasks of the provisional government will be to prepare the way for free elections.
Sir Paul will announce the government next week. It will not be made up of politicians and will probably run the country for at least 6 months. After 4 years' neglect, the old parliamentary house is a shambles. Leading Grenadians want more than just free elections.
The quickest way is to rebuild our economy. Don't send us food aid or blankets. Give us scholarships. Send us technicians and send us tourists. We have a wonderful country.
The confidence needed to bring back foreign visitors cannot be maintained until there's a truly representative government. But already there are those who helped Maurice Bishop to power, saying that with America breathing down their necks, the elections will not reflect all political opinion. Brent Sadler, News at 10, Grenada.
57 Cubans wounded in the fighting in Grenada have been flown home aboard a Red Cross jet. They were taken straight to hospital, but they got a hero's welcome first.
Beyond a fleet of military and civilian ambulances, the Red Cross DC-8 taxied in 3 days later than expected after diplomatic wrangling over the Cubans' return. Fidel Castro was there, looking strained, betraying the fact that this was a national and personal setback. The 57 wounded Cubans and the dead still in Grenada are the victims of the first ever Cuban military clash with the United States. 2/3 walked off. Each received a personal welcome from Castro. Some of the wounded were too ill to respond. Others waved, clearly relieved to be home after the long wait in US military custody on Grenada. The welcome was restrained, the crowd small. Fidel Castro, the Cuban commander-in-chief, stepped forward with a few words to clasp hands. No one clapped or showed any emotion. Cubans had been asked to stay away. There was no reunion with relatives at the airport. Crowds lined the route into the city, ignoring official announcements to watch the 57 ambulances pass. For a week, hospitals had been on standby to receive the wounded. There still appear to be formidable problems and delays ahead before the Cuban dead and the 600 prisoners are returned here. Only then will there be a state funeral and a renewal of mass demonstrations of anti-American feeling by the Cubans. Nick Gowing, News at 10, Havana.
White South Africans have voted by a 2-to-1 majority for a new constitution which will give the small coloured and Asian communities limited parliamentary rights. The 21 million blacks who outnumber whites by 5-to-1 played no part in the referendum. 66% of the white electorate, 1.36 million, voted for the constitutional reforms and 34%, 691,000, against. Of the 15 electoral districts, only one, Petersburg, on the border with Zimbabwe, voted no.
The Reverend Jesse Jackson has become the first black candidate for the presidency of the United States. Announcing that he would seek the Democratic nomination, the 8th candidate to do so, Mr. Jackson said he wanted to restore a moral tone of peace and fairness to America.
Every song in the book is being adjusted. Hello, Jesse was but one. Long before the announcement, the crowd was being warmed up by the survivors of the 60s civil rights movement, upon which Jackson has built his campaign. So, to the entrance of the first black ever to seriously challenge for the Democrat Party nomination to be the candidate for president. Though there are divisions amongst the 14 million black voters here as to whether he should run, he's devised a coalition of blacks, Hispanics, the unemployed, women and nuclear freeze advocates. Seasoned observers reckon there were more cameras and pressmen here today than ever before on an equivalent domestic event, ensuring today at least that Jesse Jackson had greater access to America through the media than any black before him. No one seriously believes Jackson will win this time, but he will force others to discuss the issues he's campaigning on, and his presence ensures that the campaign for the 1984 presidential nomination here will be like none that has gone before. John Snow, News at 10, Washington.
Here, the chairman of British Caledonians, Adam Thompson, says that British Airways in private hands would swamp and stifle the other independent airlines, including his own. At present, British Airways, which has just made a half-year profit of over £100 million, controls 83% of British airline business. British Caledonian has about 13%, with other independents taking 4%. So Adam has told the government he thinks a fairer division would be 70%, 20% and 10% after British Airways is privatised.
They control over 80% of the scheduled service output in this country at the moment. They've been losing an awful lot of money. That money, of course, has disappeared as government debt. They're going to have to be in a position to be attractive to the city. Therefore, a lot of funds will have to be pumped into them. They'll come out as the most attractive airline in the world. They'll be at the best airport in the world. And they will be competitive with the rest of the independent sector. Now, the airline industry just now is still going through a crisis, and here's this big knight in shining armor coming out of the crisis, and there's no doubt at all that they will squash the other independent airlines.
The 8-week strike at the Monkton Hall colliery near Edinburgh could soon be over. The Coal Board has agreed to union demands to reopen talks about future development at the pit.
The Minister for Sport, Mr Neil McFarlane, will meet Spurs chairman tomorrow to discuss the crowd violence at last night's UEFA Cup tie in Holland. 30 people were injured, 11 of them seriously, in the match against Feyenoord in Rotterdam. Police arrested 33 supporters, 22 of them British. A Spurs fan was knocked to the ground, kicked and then trampled during the worst of the fighting. It began when 100 Tottenham supporters appeared on the terraces reserved for home fans. One man fractured his skull and 6 Spurs fans are still seriously ill in hospital with stab wounds and head injuries.
The Sports Council has called for more random tests to check the use of drugs by British sportsmen. Its chairman, Mr Dick Jeep, says cheats and biochemists will take over sport unless the authorities stamp out apathy, ignorance and evasion.
Swimming says it's difficult to carry out random drug tests because of practical difficulties with many of their arenas in Britain. Athletics carries out tests at major championships, but has yet to agree that they should be done on athletes at any time during training before such events. Out of 70 different sports in Britain, only rowing has taken up the Sports Council's offer of free tests taken at random. Chris Mahoney, one of Britain's silver medal winning 8 at the last Olympics, shows how simple is the process for the athlete himself. Under the supervision of a doctor, he provides a sample of urine for analysis at little inconvenience to his training programme. But why has rowing accepted random testing when so many other sports remain indifferent?
I talked about it to the coaches and to the oarsmen and oarswomen, and they both thought it was a thoroughly good idea and supported it. The Sports Council agreed to cover the cost 100%, and we've had now nearly 100 random samples in 2 years. Not one of them has been positive, I'm glad to say. And I think it gives them a certain amount of confidence that whatever any other country may be doing or any other sport may be doing, we have actually, as far as one can do, proved that we are clean.
Slightly frightens me when governing bodies, you hear said, oh, it doesn't happen in our sport. How can any of us decide that they don't take drugs? Isn't it better if we offer a free service for drug detection to governing bodies, that every one of them should really take the opportunity to just have a look at their sport and allow a few samples to be taken to see if their sport does have a problem?
Tonight's headlines again. PLO leader Yasser Arafat and his followers are struggling to defend their last stronghold in northern Lebanon. They're under fierce attack from Palestinian rebels backed by Syria. The Americans are tracking a Russian nuclear-powered submarine apparently in trouble off the Carolina coast, and unemployment is down 73,000 to just above 3 million.
Finally, the American defense budget is currently running at $187,000 million a year. The Senate committee is busy looking into possible overcharging by contractors. One senator is particularly concerned about this small antenna wrench for which the contractor is asking $9,500 each. Senate investigators say it can be bought at any old hardware store for just 12 cents. Quite a markup, even in the defense business. That's the news tonight. Good night.
Next tonight, the Thames News headlines, followed by more police action with a Sweeney.
Technics organs with PCM sound, giving the world a new realism.
Come back through Christmas past and into Christmas present. Now picture everything you'd wish for Christmas yet to come. A season full of rich delights awaits you now at Harrods.
How was training, Dave?
No problem. Wish I could say the same about these spots.
This is what the other lads use, Biactol. Look, this is how a spot starts. A blocked skin pore. Wash every day with Biactol instead of ordinary soap, and it removes dirt and grease and helps kill the bacteria that cause the spots. How's the spots now, Dave?
Oh, I bet it's rare as one of Gary's goals.
Biactol. Fewer spots just by daily washing.
From the outside, thick bleaches may look like Domestos, but Domestos is different. Domestos is twice as thick as ordinary thick bleaches, so it clings longer and works harder. To demonstrate this, we cleaned one toilet with ordinary thick bleach and another with new, thicker Domestos. Both were flushed and a blue dye added. See how ordinary thick bleach has been flushed away and is no longer cleaning. But new, thicker Domestos goes on working, bleaching the dye, cleaning the bowl, killing the germs. Domestos goes on working, even after the flush.
Discover B-Jam, where fish and chips can mean 100 different things. They've got cod and kippers.
Haddock.
Sole.
Salmon steak.
Salmon whole.
Bargain fingers.
Fish in shoals.
Fish in shells.
Lobster.
Oh, what about plaice?
Placed with ham, placed with cheese, placed with mushrooms.
Plaice like these?
This isn't any old place, this is B-Jam. Whatever you choose, there's always a choice.
Discover B-Jam, the world of frozen food.
RAM, flexible ROM, PROM, EEPROM, current loop interface ports, parallel ports, serial ports.
Z88 4 MHz processor, memory map VDU, twin floppies, double density, double-sided,
600 by 200 pixels.
If you're a businessman looking for a word processor or a desktop computer, maybe you've already talked to someone. Or tried to. Well, here's someone who'll tell you about their range in a language you'll understand. English.
Free phone Merlin, please.
British Telecom Merlin. Someone had to make it simpler.
Poke. Peek. Run and snobble. Pardon?
I enjoy great performance, like the Ferguson TX. I think it's the best picture of all time. And now, with stereo capability and Ferguson Supersound, I believe it has the best sound all round. Whatever your choice. The Ferguson TX Stereo, a great performer. In my view, the best picture of all time, the best sound all round.
Good evening. The Thames News headlines. The Prime Minister warned today that the government could take action if the GLC go ahead with the appointment of a left-wing councillor to the Board of London Transport. There have been protests that 25-year-old Merle Amery lacks the necessary experience, and her appointment would swing the political balance of the board to the left. The GLC Police Committee Chairman, Paul Boateng, has called for police and councils to protect blacks from racial attacks. A special GLC panel has accused the Metropolitan Police of racial harassment and not doing enough to end racial violence. Unemployment in the southeast has stopped rising, according to figures out today. The total number claiming unemployment benefit last month dropped by nearly 9,000 to just over 726,000. In Greater London, 3,000 fewer people were on the dole. The government are considering tightening up the laws controlling air guns to protect animals. Chipping Barnet MP Sidney Chapman told the Commons today that more and more pets are being shot, some being left paralysed for life. And Thames Weather, sorry, not Thames Weather yet, Luton MP is asking the government to give political cash to the town's football club to stop them moving to Milton Keynes. John Carlisle says the decision, confirmed today after weeks of speculation, will tear the heart out of Luton. Now Thames Weather. Tonight, fog with the temperature not falling below 6 centigrade, 43 Fahrenheit. Tomorrow, after the fog clears, a bright, mild day with a high of 13 centigrade, 55 Fahrenheit. Rain possible in the late afternoon. That's it. Now, the Sweeney.
I love him. Can't you understand?
You're not going to see your husband in this house for the next 15 years, unless you help us locate that money and get the rest of the gang.
Look, you cooperate with us and we may be able to bring his parole forward.
Are you trying to tell me you'll help?
Mrs. Whittle, your husband's going to spend the last good years of his life in prison, while Miles and Ward and the rest of the gang are outside laughing.
Not only that, love, your old man is still controlling that money they stole, and he's giving it away to the rest of his gang.
Money that you'll never be able to spend.
Look, all you've got to do is find out where the money's now hidden. Your husband will never know you told us.
Or does he love his fellow thieves more than you? More even than the kids?
I'd do it, if only he'd let me.
Well, he's not going to tell you to tip us off, is he?
Look, love, we understand his code of honour. We're not asking him to shop his mates. We're asking you to do it for him. For his own sake.
For his sake?
I thought you said you loved him.
You were a bit hard on her, Gov.
She knew he was a villain. She was quite happy to share the jollies as long as he was free. Don't give me any of that crap about suffering wives, George. You'll have me in tears.
Yeah, but she's too scared of Whittle ever to open her mouth.
Look, as long as we knew where that money was, all we had to do was sit back and wait for Miles and Ward to collect it, right? Now it's been nicked from under our noses. We're back to square one.
But terrorising her isn't going to help, is it? Look, she needs money. What happens if she goes to the press?
Stuff the press.